My story begins in Dallas. I was born in Oak Cliff, a neighborhood in South Dallas, not necessarily known for great wealth, sort of the home of Lee Harvey Oswald, though. And so a lot of history there. My family had been from a town in southern Texas outside of Waco called Marlin, Texas. And my grandmother and her eight children, I believe. I would actually have to do an active count to remember, but there were a lot, including my mother. Moved up to Dallas and had a home in the Oak Cliff neighborhood, and I was actually born there in Methodist Hospital, so not too far away. My mother once told me when I was much older that she didn't even see a white person, for example, until she was about 15 years old in her neighborhood. And my grandmother was an activist in that Oak Cliff neighborhood. And so I remember as a child watching her protest. The city, to this day, actually, hasn't fully installed sewage systems in a lot of the neighborhoods in southern Dallas. So my grandma would go around asking, she was on the local news, WFAA, the ABC affiliate, asking the city to come put in better sewage, to fix the streets. I remember watching her on TV on a segment right after a segment on the zoo. That's kind of the environment I grew up in. My mother was a singer, so she had a beautiful voice and got a full scholarship to go to college, but really became homesick. She was one of the first people in the family to go that far away from home. She was only in Austin. And so she ended up dropping out, coming back to Dallas, partly to help take care of family and partly because she just missed family. So I was a total nerd as a kid. And that's, I think, what affected me, especially the fact that I was allowed to be. Um, that affected me, I think, more than anything because I was obsessed. My mom was a single mom. I ate once a day because she was woke up in the morning, she had to go to work. I was a little bit of a shut-in or very shy, introverted at school, so I didn't eat lunch. And then we would eat dinner together in the evening. She encouraged me to do things like watch Star Trek, which I remember came on every day, Star Trek The Next Generation. There was a rerun at 6 o'clock, and then there was a new episode at 9 o'clock at night. And she would take me to the library, and I was obsessed with science and science fiction. And despite the things I saw around me, it really just opened my world and my mind up to all the different ways that people can be, society can be structured. I'm still profoundly affected by the thought that there are so many people who unfortunately think there's only one way society can be. But in fact, there are many different ways we could structure our society depending upon technologies, depending upon the institutions that we choose to invest power in and to trust. I was a total nerd. She encouraged me to read all this nerdy stuff. I would go to neighbors' houses or to her friends' houses, and I was a very rude little boy. So I would want to stay in the car even when it was like 90 degrees. She would beg me to get out and leave all the doors on all the windows open and come out and check. But I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to read my book. And those worlds I encountered there, which she was able to shelter me enough from the environment around that I could enjoy. I kind of grew up just believing in figuring out what's possible. And along the way, there were a lot of bumps in the road. She gave everything to send me to a very small private school until I was in like the sixth grade. And then at that point, she had to move to be closer to work. So I went to a public school for the first time since I had been, in kindergarten. And I got picked on because I was a nerd. I might have picked on me too, because I was a complete dork. But I always strive to excel. I think that's something that people don't realize also. People can strive to excel in bad environments. And sometimes when you do that, it leads to excelling at the wrong things. But the energy and the work ethic, quote unquote, is there. It's just that it needs to be channeled in a more productive way. And I was a perfect example of that phenomenon. I, at some point, joined a gang. I got sent to alternative school for weapons possession when I was in the eighth grade. I was just trying to fit in. The first time I had just gotten sent to the alternative school, and there was a guy in one of my classes, and he kept going, anime, just repeatedly. And I was like, dude, what are you talking about, man? Like, what is this? And he was like, no, you got to check this. You got to check this out. So I went to Blockbuster Video, which I'm just shocked at how much that dates us all who remember going to Blockbuster. But I went to Blockbuster and I picked up And I was just randomly walking through, and they had a little section on anime. And I found this anime called Neon Genesis Evangelion. I brought it home, and I remember the first few seconds, like the music comes in, and there are these giant robots. I was like, "Whoa, are those giant robots?" And I remember watching it, and within the first 5 minutes, thinking like, "Well, if I'm doing what I've been doing, like running with these guys and doing things that my mother was trying to tell me not to do, then I will never have my own giant robot." I remember just very distinctly having that thought. It's probably one of the most distinct moments in my life. And from then on, I changed. Like I got back to that view of life. I had never even heard of an AP class. Pretty soon, I was a sophomore in high school, and I signed up. I was the only person of color outside of, um, you know, a couple of others. There was a small cohort. And what was shocking to me is I'd been in high school 2 years. I'd never even heard of these classes. And so I was like, oh, sure, I'll sign up because, giant robot science, like, cool. And that led to economics and debate. And it really just changed my life. I started hanging out with different people. I was one of the first people in the Richardson School District right outside of Dallas to actually be part of a busing program. So I was the first generation that was able to pick whichever school we wanted. I actually went to a school, originally Park Hill Junior High and J.J. Pierce High School, that I can say unabashedly was very racist. At one point, I had a bottle thrown in my head, called a nigger, girls spit in my face. Apologies for the language. There were also resources there. They had a Japanese language program. So I started learning Japanese so I could watch anime without subtitles. I'm fluent now. And all these years later, I still watch anime religiously. But at the core of who I am is like what I've realized from all those experiences is that I'm all about possibilities and potential. Mentoring is so very important. I had a mentor when I was an undergraduate. Again, I was very introverted as a kid. I've learned to do small talk and to be more social as I've gotten older. But when I first got to college in Pennsylvania, I went to the University of Pittsburgh, one of the branch campuses called Bradford, PA. So right south of Buffalo, really small town. And so I'm on campus, and I still like to eat lunch alone, same as when I was a kid. I go in the cafeteria, and an older gentleman comes up to me and sits down kind of without asking, and starts asking me, how am I doing? He knows my name. I'm like, this is really strange. Turns out he was the associate dean of the school, and he ended up being a mentor to me. He comes and sits down to me. I'm at this point as far away from home as I've ever been, Pennsylvania, from Texas, and he starts telling me stories about study abroad, about his journeys in Thailand and what he saw in Japan and South Africa and India. And I had not even thought of these possibilities. Like, I had not thought that I could do something like that. And so eventually he tells me he's been selected to be the dean of the semester at sea program. And he's like, you should join me. I'm going to do the next voyage. And I was like, no, I can't afford that. It's incredibly expensive. But he told me about a scholarship fund. I applied. I got the scholarship. I found myself 4 months later, getting on a plane, flying to LA and then up to Vancouver. And then I'd never seen the ocean in my life. All of a sudden, I'm in Vancouver, walking onto a big cruise ship where I'm going to be living for the next 3 to 4 months, going to 12 different countries with professors and students from universities all over the US and all over the world. And all of that is because someone took the time to talk to me about their experience and open my mind to what's possible. And so I try to do that. I don't try to preach or anything. I just try to talk about, what's possible, and the kinds of people I meet and the kinds of places I go and the kinds of things I see. And I think that if everyone could just mentor someone, such a very simple thing, find someone to mentor, find someone to be your mentor. So much of life can change if we develop those genuine relationships. When I realized getting out of college, which itself was, an opportunity my family had never had. I was one of the first in my family to go to college. My mother went but never completed it. I just realized how difficult it was, and this was during the Great Recession, just to find a job. I think a lot of people experienced this then in '07, '08, and even graduates in '06, or folks just looking for work or looking to change their lives during that time. and it may be something that's happening again now, that you can do all the right things, but if you don't necessarily always know the right people, if you don't know where to look, then it can be hard, even with the right credentials, the right work ethic, to find an opportunity just for someone, just an opportunity to be given a chance. One of my mentors, she's the CEO and founder of an NGO based in Dallas called GlobalWare that sends volunteers all around the world to do things like building schools, building orphanages or facilities within orphanages to help youth all around the world in Thailand, Laos, Costa Rica, Jamaica. And she brought me on after an internship that I've been fortunate enough to have to create an Africa volunteer program. So I was the age of 22 and I probably was less than qualified, but she had faith in me and gave me that opportunity. That's when I really realized that not everyone gets those kinds of opportunities. Not everyone finds those kinds of mentors, meets those kinds of connections and networks, and it can be life-changing, but it doesn't happen necessarily on accident. And that was, I think, when I realized that it takes someone stepping up to help you a lot of times to be able to access opportunities. So I try to do that now as a mentor in other ways because it was done for me. For me, rock bottom was 2012, 2013. That was the year that my mother passed away. I was applying literally to hundreds of jobs. I'd actually gone back to school. I'd gone to grad school, University of London, to get my master's in international studies and economics, and came back. And when I left, my mother was very youthful. She always looked at least 20 years younger than her age on paper. And so when I left for London in 2011, she looked perhaps 40 years old. When I came back, she looked to be well into her 60s. And this was just a little over a year later. And so initially, I'd never planned to move back to the US for a variety of reasons. I'm a nerd. Living in the land of Doctor Who sounded amazing. And I loved London. But I came back and saw her state, and I just stayed in Dallas. One of the things I would tell young people is really think carefully about, a lot of people get too obsessed with what degree you get, but it's more targeted than that. If you're going to get a certain degree, there are certain places where it's easier to get jobs in that field than others, which is not like a revolutionary statement, but I do feel like it's something that I hadn't really thought about until I encountered it in the real world. I also don't believe in the no-win scenario because a lot of the time you can win if you perhaps change your objective or change, it could be a positive change of objective or change of timeline or change of expectations. And I just don't believe, and I guess that's what got me through. I didn't know this until like a month before she passed, but she had been told by doctors that she was going to die 5 years before and not told anyone. And I think you might say for her, that's a no-win scenario, but she didn't tell anyone. I struggled with this for years, but if she had, I think, knew that I would stop going to school, that I would give everything to try to protect her. That was her victory, that she was able to be strong in that way and produce some positive objective out of that, which was supporting me, who she loved. And I'm really grateful for that. But I think that's an example of kind of how I think. And maybe I inherited that either directly or indirectly from, being around her. I just don't believe in a no-win scenario. I went back to Dallas, which is not particularly or exactly a hub for international studies and economics careers. And so I was there with no job, living with my girlfriend, and I tried to take care of my mom. I applied to hundreds, literally hundreds of jobs. I have an old spreadsheet that I look at, and it began with jobs that were in line with my career and my background. Then it was jobs aligned with my undergraduate degree. Then it was just jobs that were at organizations that were of interest that I might be able to just get in the door and then work my way over to something that fit kind of my passions and the expertise I wanted to build and develop. And then it was just anything. and hundreds of jobs in, I had nothing. I was becoming depressed, asking myself what it was all for. I left my mom and now she's in this state. I hadn't been there for her and I couldn't even get a job to help, take care of her. It was a situation that for years spiraled. And she passed away. I ended up getting an unpaid quote unquote returnship in San Francisco, one of the most expensive cities in the world. Luckily, I had an adopted brother and good friend who lived there. So I moved in, lived on his couch. I was away from the person I love. My mother had just passed away, and I felt I couldn't do anything to save her. After all the money and time I'd spent studying and learning, the only job I could get was unpaid in the most expensive city on planet Earth is what it felt like. And there was one particular day where I was trying to catch the Caltrain to go into town. I thought I'd canceled my Netflix subscription. All my funds were running low. I think I had $14 at the start of the day. I was planning to take it, and then I wouldn't have to go back to the internship for another week. But Netflix charged me. And so I only had $7, enough to get into the city from the South Bay, but not back. So I took the train, went to work, did my best. Really, I think it was sometime around then I encountered an article about how hard it is just to think when you're dealing with scarcity. But I'm there working, trying to, you know, do enough for them to give me a job. And while I don't even know what I'm going to do, I have nothing to eat or what I'm going to do when I leave. And I did end up leaving, and rock bottom for me was just wandering around the streets of San Francisco, hoping that I got refunded before the banks closed so that I could actually get home. Otherwise, I'd be sleeping on the street. And I did find a spot. Just as I sort of settled in to sleep, I kind of realized, oh, the money did come through, but something has got to change with how I'm living my life. And something's got to change about how we support people in achieving their dreams and trying to reach their potential, because it shouldn't be this hard just to find an opportunity. You shouldn't have to move to San Francisco just to get an unpaid internship that could be done remotely in the 21st century, as an example. So that was my rock bottom. And that's when a lot of things started to change for me. And I started to really, I stopped being so obsessed with a particular career path and started asking myself, why do I want to do the things I do? What impact do I want to have? And what are the many different types of careers and ways that I can get there and I can make that impact? That next day where I said, look, I've just got to get a job. Like, it doesn't matter what I've done in the past. I just need to get a job. I've got to give up these dreams. I've got to give up whatever it is that I'm trying to do and just get a job. I took a role delivering pizzas. And so I'm just delivering pizzas, doing this internship. That was probably the most stark point where I just said, look, I've got to go a different way. I'm always very stubborn. So even though I couldn't eat, I was, with the money I had, I was eating 7-Eleven bean and cheese burritos literally every day. But I just couldn't do that. I could not give up on what I wanted to do, or at least doing something that I felt had an impact. So I just kept telling myself, that's a false choice. I can find a way to do this. But I was getting drained of energy, and I realized not having food that's nutritious, not having, having all this anxiety and not being able to sleep, it affects your ability to hold on to a dream. And this relates. So my mother brought me, it was one of the only vacations we ever went on. She brought me to Washington, D.C. She was coming here for work. And at the time, I'd never, ever left Dallas at all. We stepped out of the Smithsonian Metro stop. It was snowing. I'm again from Dallas, Texas. We don't really have snow. When you think it's snow, you go somewhere like Pennsylvania or something, you're like, oh, snow. And so we stepped out there, snow falling, the Capitol to the right, Washington Monument to the left, and there was a quartet playing Canon in D, and there were protesters, and I was like, wow, I love this. And I was probably about 16 years old. I was like, I want to live here. A few days after I hit that rock bottom, I got a call back from an organization here in DC. At the time, they were called Truist. They were a technology company. I ended up getting an offer, and some friends helped me. This was the dawn of kind of crowdfunding in many ways. And So some friends helped me get a plane ticket. I flew here, left my car, left almost all my possessions, basically found a closet to live in. And here I was in DC. But the crazy thing about it was now I'm in DC, got a master's degree. At this point, years of experience in the international NGO space. And I was getting paid $38,000 a year to live in DC. So I was grateful. I was incredibly grateful just to be able to eat something other than a bean and cheese burrito from 7-Eleven. I could get the pizza now. But it was still hard. And I still just sat there thinking like, wow, this is great, but this is not enough to live off of in the city like this. When I first got invited to speak at a conference on the work that I was doing. It was actually my own company's corporate conference. They flew us all out to Vegas. I was speaking in front of, all of our customers that were assembled there. We had about 80 Fortune 500 companies and hundreds more partnered with United Way. And I got on stage, and I had been, at this point, I'd gotten a couple of raises and a couple of promotions, and I was head of analytics. It's probably about 2 years later, still living in a closet. So I'm there in that banquet hall, and I remember pacing in the hotel room. That was like the most beautiful place I had stayed in years at this point. And just thinking like, if I need to go out and do a good job, because people who can spread the word about me or who might be willing to give me a chance in the future need to see that I have a vision for what we can do and for what can be done in this sort of technology space that we were inhabiting, technology for social good. And I did end up making connections there that led to my next role and to my next opportunity to come speak. And the role after that, going through all of those experiences, it can really feel like no one cares what you think or what you're experiencing or what you're feeling or what you have to say. And standing on stage, especially for me, it felt like someone was listening to what I had to say. And maybe now they'll give me a chance because they'll know, oh, basically I'm not a dummy. There's so much institutionally that needs to change. I mean, quite frankly, and I don't just mean the government. I mean, businesses have to catch up. Why are you requiring your interns to be in New York City or San Francisco? It's an unpaid job. You're saying you want applicants from a diverse pool increasingly or from all over the country. There are people of all races, all genders in Kansas City who cannot go to New York and take an unpaid internship. Why are they being left out of accessing so many opportunities? So there are institutional challenges that I can't address, but I try to do what I can, what little it might be. Recently, as I've been able to have more resources, I've become an angel investor. And so I try to find entrepreneurs of color or women entrepreneurs here that I can become acquainted with, that I can support here in the DC area. And I try to provide them with funds, and I try to provide them with advice. I try to help in any way I can, especially if they're trying to build a product or something. And really just help them to be given a chance, which I felt it took me so much work to do. I want to be someone who gives other people a chance, which is another thing that a lot of us could do. But I think there are laws we could change to make a lot of those systems more accessible. Like, why is it that there are income thresholds for angel investing that have left so many people and groups of people who could pool funds together out of the process of the growth of small businesses in their own community? You see, I try to invest in things that are that not only are founded by people who need to be given a chance, but also that democratize functions or things that used to be inaccessible. I'm also working on a book that should be out in February, and it's called Dreams Deferred, and it's about my life and my experience, a lot of what we've talked about. And I want other people to know my story in the hopes that maybe it helps someone who's hit that rock bottom or who's trying to think about what their possibilities are. Just understand that there's a lot of different ways to move forward. I think a lot of us get caught up in this vision, this very narrow vision that we might have for good reason, because we work hard to get there. But that's not it. If we just let our minds open, there's always a way to be successful. There's always a way to win. Instead of just saying, hey, I can't get this job, I lose, What I instead said was why? Why do I want this job? And I really always try to do an exercise. Whenever I encounter a difficult challenge or problem, I just say why? What's at the core of what I'm unhappy about, or what's at the core of what I want? And in this case, that's when I realized a lot of these things about why I want the things I want around, the influence that science fiction had on me and the kinds of better worlds that I believe that we can create. It was at this time because I said, I want to do NGO work because it helps people to reach that potential and it helps to create a foundation for this better world. So I kind of examined, that's the core of why I wanted to do the things I wanted to do. And then I asked myself, well, what are the other ways that that can happen? And I actually, around the time I hit rock bottom, I began to make kind of a mapping of the sectors I wanted to work in. Because I said, I had this very limited view of what success meant. I had this very limited view of the kinds of jobs and career titles, et cetera, that I should have. But if I just ask myself why and go back to that foundation, I could actually see that there were new movements, new kinds of careers that I hadn't examined that I could be compatible with and could enjoy that also feed into that same objective, which I've kind of boiled down to building innovations, building technologies, building institutions, building programs that help resources to move to the people that need them. So that opened up, and something like there's no-win scenario there because you can always reframe what success means. And in that, you can grasp victory. Ask yourself why. Why do you want to do the things you do? Why do you want to live the life you want? Not so that you can do something different, but just because understanding the reasons why can really help you to see what success really means to you. It's not necessarily the title that you might have had in mind. It's the action that title and the freedom that title allows you to make change or to act. And there may be other ways to get there. And once you understand that, there's no such thing as that no-win scenario because there are a million ways to get to an outcome of success if you just know at your deepest core what it is that you hope to achieve. I spent so many years trying to be a title or trying to get a job or a salary when if I had just stepped back, I could have saved some time. If we want to realize this greater future that I grew up reading about, this future where humanity does amazing things like conquering the stars and conquering disease and just creating a better world, then it's going to take all of us. You can't do that if it's a limited number of voices contributing to the path that we take. That's not how innovation works. For me, the American dream is just the opportunity to be given a chance, a real chance. That's all it is. When I was applying to those hundreds of jobs, that's all I didn't want anyone to give me a handout. I did realize there were some definite structural inequalities that were getting in the way, but all I wanted was to be given a chance. And to me, if we keep asking why and keep re-examining some of these structures, I think that's a worthwhile thing. That's how we allow people to reach their potential and create a better world together.